Now, we said that when we created a function, there was a scope. And we also said that when you access the value of a variable that isn't defined in a scope, it looks in the outermost scope, or it will look in whatever scope is being contained here. But what if we define a function inside of another function? So for example, let's go ahead and define a variable called a, and I'm going to actually write a real example here because it might help make it easier to understand what's going on. So I'm going to define a function called make counter, and it's going to take an optional value, which I'll start at 0 as a default. And then inside of here, I'm going to define a function called inc counter, and all it's going to do is it's going to set val equal to val plus 1, and then it's going to return val. So if I do this, let's say print val here, you'll see that I have a little issue, right? So this has got a curly red line, unresolved reference val, even though this val is here. So let me comment this out for a second. Oh, that's not how you comment things out in Python. So if I comment this line out, you'll notice that this val isn't highlighted anymore. So this is not a problem to Python. So which val is this referring to? If I print val, it's finding it. So which val is it referring to? Yep. So Dylan says 0. That's right. It's going to be referring to this val here, which was a parameter to make counter. It's just like a local variable. Val lives inside of this scope here. So there's a scope for make counter, and val is defined inside of that namespace for that scope. And then inc counter is defined inside of the same scope. And so it can access inside of this scope. Inc counter has a variable. If I refer to the variable val inside of this scope here, it won't find val here, but it'll look in the enclosing scope and it'll find it there. And the counter updates val, right? It will in a second. So when you refer to the value of something, it will look in the outermost scopes, and it will start from here and it will move out one step at a time. So val, we find it here. If we didn't find it here because like this was X instead of val, and then we had it here. So here, it's looking in this scope, it doesn't find val. So it looks in this scope and it doesn't find val. And so it looks in this scope and it does find val. So it starts from the innermost scope and it works its way out one step at a time until it actually finds this variable, and then it can access the value. So that's how scopes work. They're lexically, in the written word, in the written page, they're inside of other scopes, and you work your way from the inside out. Now, if I go ahead and put this back in here, you'll see I have a variable called val in the module level scope, and I also have a variable called val inside of the scope for make counter. But these are two different scopes with two different namespaces. And so these are two different variables that are named val that live in different scopes. And when you have this kind of relationship, when you have a variable called val, which is defined in a scope that's inside of some other scope with a variable called val, we say that this thing shadows this thing. So it shadows it because if I ask for the value of this thing here, it's going to find this one and it's not going to see this one at all. So if I run this code now, well, I'm not quite ready to run this just yet, but if I did run this code here, it would tell me that the value of val is 0, because it would never get to the outer scope to see the value of val here is 3. If I got rid of this thing here, then this val is no longer shadowed. And so now if I asked for the value of val, it would be 3, and now it would be 0.